Welcome to English Every Day, the podcast. I'm Mary.
And I'm Luke. It's great to be with you all. How has your week been, Mary?
It's been good, but really busy. It actually made me think about our topic for today. I had this moment where I needed to interrupt my boss, who was clearly in the middle of something important. And I was standing there trying to figure out the absolute politest way to do it.
The classic dilemma. How to interrupt without causing a scene. What did you go with?
I think I went with a very hesitant, sorry to interrupt, but if you have a moment. It worked, but it got me thinking about all those little phrases we use to grease the wheels of social interaction.
That's a perfect way to describe it. We're talking about buffer phrases today. The little expressions that soften our language, make requests more polite, and help us navigate potentially awkward moments.
Exactly. They're like the shock absorbers in a car. You can drive without them, but the ride is going to be a lot bumpier and more uncomfortable for everyone involved. Using them correctly can make you sound incredibly natural and fluent.
Right. It's the difference between saying, I need the report, and would you mind sending me that report when you have a moment? The first is a direct command. The second is a respectful request. And that difference is huge.
It really is, especially in professional or new social settings. So we've gathered a whole list of these incredibly useful phrases, and we're going to break them down into a few key categories, starting with the one I needed this week, politeness and softening requests.
Let's dive in. This is probably the most common use for buffer phrases. The absolute classic has to be, would you mind? As in, would you mind closing the window?
It's so much gentler than close the window. The intonation is important too, isn't it? Your voice usually goes up at the end, making it sound like a genuine question, not a hidden command.
That's a great point. And you brought up something really important for learners earlier, the answer. If someone asks, would you mind, and you're happy to do it, the correct response is no, not at all, or of course not.
Right, it's a common little trap. You're saying no, which means no, I don't mind. If you say yes, you're technically saying yes, I do mind, which implies you don't want to do it. It can be a little confusing at first.
Exactly. Another one I use constantly, like in your situation with your boss, is if you have a moment. It shows immediate respect for the other person's time. If you have a moment, could you look this over for me?
It completely changes the dynamic. It signals that you recognize they're busy and that you're asking for a favor, not a demand. It's a small phrase that carries a ton of social awareness.
Totally. Now, let's flip it. What about when you're on the receiving end and you have to say no? That's always tricky.
Yes, the gentle decline. Instead of a blunt no, a wonderful softener is, I'm afraid I can't. For example, I'm afraid I can't make it to the meeting tomorrow. The phrase, I'm afraid, doesn't mean you're scared. It's a polite formula for introducing bad news or disagreement.
Right. It expresses regret. It shows you wish the circumstances were different. It's much warmer. Another version, which I think is even softer, is I'd love to, but...
Yes, I use this all the time for social invitations. I'd love to join you for dinner, but I have other plans. It's brilliant because it starts with a positive. You're affirming the invitation and the person before you have to decline.
That's the secret, isn't it? Affirming the relationship before delivering the no. It cushions the blow and preserves the connection.
Exactly. One last one for this category. Do you happen to know? As in, do you happen to know where the nearest coffee shop is?
Ooh, that's a very good one. It's extremely indirect and polite. The phrase happen to suggests that knowing the answer would be a coincidence. It takes all the pressure off the person you're asking.
Right. It's like saying, there's an outside chance you might have this information, but if you don't, it's absolutely no problem. It's perfect for asking strangers for help.
Okay, so our next set of phrases is about something just as important as speaking, listening. Specifically, how to show you're an active, engaged listener.
This is such a crucial skill. Let's start with a couple of my favorites. That makes sense, and I see what you mean.
Simple, but so effective. When someone is explaining something especially complicated or maybe their feelings on a matter, dropping in a "that makes sense" shows them that you're following along and you understand their point of view.
It really validates their perspective. And it's important to note, as you said, it doesn't necessarily mean you agree with them. You can fully understand someone's reasoning without sharing their conclusion.
That is a crucial distinction. You can say, I see what you mean, but I have a different perspective on it. It shows you've listened respectfully before presenting your own argument.
Totally. Now, what if you want to take the conversation to a deeper level? Maybe a friend is telling you about a problem they had at work.
A fantastic phrase for that is, how did that make you feel? It's a powerful question that shifts the focus from the practical details of a story to the emotional core of the experience.
It really deepens the connection. You're showing that you care not just about what happened, but how it impacted them as a person.
That's it. And if you just want to keep the story moving, there are simpler options, like a simple go on.
Yes, or what happened next? They're like little verbal nudges. They act as encouragement, signaling to the speaker, I'm invested in this story. Please don't stop now.
A little encouragement. Go on is so useful when someone pauses. Maybe they're gathering their thoughts or they're not sure if you're still interested. It's a gentle way to say, I'm still with you.
And what happened next adds that little bit of suspense and excitement. It shows you're on the edge of your seat. All these little phrases transform you from a passive audience member into an active, engaged participant in their story.
All right. This next section is incredibly practical, especially for anyone learning a new language, but honestly, native speakers use these constantly as well. It's all about clarification and managing those moments when communication gets a little fuzzy.
Yes, these are absolute lifesavers. First up, the most essential one. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
A must know. It's so much more polite and effective than just saying, what? Or even worse, just nodding and smiling when you have no idea what was just said.
So true. And I like that it frames the problem as you're hearing. I didn't catch it, rather than they're speaking. It's a very subtle, polite shift. A good follow-up, if you know the person is speaking too quickly, is, could you say that a bit slower, please?
Again, it's polite and specific. The please is vital, of course, but you're also giving a very clear instruction on how they can help you understand. It's constructive.
Exactly. Now what about a situation where you think you understood the main idea, but you're not 100% sure?
That's the perfect time for, in other words, you mean. This is a technique called paraphrasing, and it's so powerful. You restate what you think they said in your own words.
Right, and they can either confirm it, yes, exactly, or they can gently correct you. It's a fantastic tool for avoiding major misunderstandings, both in your personal and professional life.
It saves so much trouble later on. Now, a very common moment of panic for a language learner is when you know exactly what you want to say, but that one crucial word just disappears from your brain.
The worst feeling. In that case, you can just be direct and ask for help. Sorry, what's the word for, and then you can describe the concept. For instance, what's the word for the metal part of a seatbelt that you click in?
The buckle, and people are almost always happy to help with that. It turns a moment of personal frustration into a collaborative learning moment.
Totally. And finally, a great little phrase to have in your back pocket if you're feeling nervous is, my English is a bit rusty today.
I love this one. It's charming and a bit self-deprecating. It's perfect for the beginning of a conversation if you haven't spoken English in a while. It just lowers the pressure for everyone.
Right. It manages the other person's expectations and makes them more patient and helpful. It's a very human, relatable thing to say.
Okay, moving on to what can be a really tricky area, setting boundaries and declining things. This can be difficult even in your native language, so having some reliable phrases in English is incredibly helpful.
This is so important for feeling comfortable and in control of a situation. Let's start with a very common scenario. You're in a clothing store, and a sales assistant comes up and asks if you need help.
And you just want to browse in peace. The perfect, polite phrase is, I'm just looking, thank you.
It's clear, it's polite, and it works 99% of the time. It ends the interaction cleanly without any awkwardness. You're acknowledging them with the thank you, but clearly stating your intention.
Exactly. A similar one for maybe a persistent salesperson or a telemarketer is, I'm not interested, but thanks anyway.
The but thanks anyway is the key part there. It softens the rejection. It acknowledges their effort or their job even as you're declining. It keeps the tone respectful.
Right, it prevents the interaction from becoming confrontational. Now let's get into more personal boundaries. What if someone asks a question you find too personal, like your salary or your love life?
This is where you can use the very direct but still perfectly polite, I'd rather not say.
That's a very clear boundary marker. The beauty of it is that you don't need to give a reason or make up an excuse. The phrase itself is the full explanation. It simply says, this topic is off limits for discussion.
And most socially aware people will respect that immediately and change the subject. A slightly softer, more situational phrase is, I need a bit of space, if you don't mind. This could be for physical space, like on a crowded train, or for emotional space in a conversation.
Right, the if you don't mind is the buffer. It turns it from a demand into a polite request. It's very useful when you feel a bit overwhelmed or crowded by someone.
And our last one in this category is a huge one, especially in the professional world. It's, let me get back to you on that.
The ultimate professional stalling tactic, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's a brilliant phrase.
It really is. It's not a yes and it's not a no. It's a, I need time to think, to check some information, or simply to not give you an answer right this second.
Exactly. It's a perfectly valid and professional response. It gives you control over the timeline instead of feeling pressured into an immediate answer you might not be ready to give. A true power phrase.
Okay, so we've navigated starting conversations, listening actively, and even setting boundaries. Now for perhaps the most challenging social skill of all, how to end a conversation.
Yes, the graceful exit. It can be so incredibly awkward if you don't have the right tools. We've all been in that conversation that just keeps going.
We really have. A fantastic, polite way to initiate the ending is, anyway, I should let you get back to it.
I love this one because it frames the ending as a courtesy to the other person. You're not saying I'm bored and I have to go. You're saying I recognize that you are a busy and important person and I must release you. It's very clever.
Totally. A slightly more direct version is, I'll let you go now. Same principle. You're giving them the gift of their time back.
Right. Now, for a warmer closing, especially if you've had a nice chat with someone you haven't seen in a while, you can add, it was lovely catching up with you.
Yes, that's a perfect summary statement for a positive interaction. It leaves things on a really happy note. You can combine them too. Anyway, it was lovely catching up with you, but I should let you get back to it. A perfect combo.
Very smooth. Now, what if you're ready to leave, but there's one last thing you need to say or ask?
The classic phrase for that is, before I forget. It works as a great transition. It signals that the main conversation is over, but you just remembered one final important detail. Oh, before I forget, could you send me that link we were talking about?
It's a perfect way to pivot. And then, for the final, no turning back statement that you are leaving,
A very common and friendly one is, right then, I'd better be off.
right then is such a great conversational punctuation mark. It signals a shift. It says, okay, this phase is over and now we're moving to the next. And I'd better be off is a clear and unambiguous statement of intent to leave.
Exactly. It's friendly, it's clear, and it's a very natural sounding way to make your exit without any of that lingering, awkward silence.
That brings us to another really important area, giving feedback or constructive criticism. This is something people often dread, both giving and receiving, but with the right phrases, it can be a really positive and productive experience. All right, we have one last category for today. This is a collection of miscellaneous but incredibly useful power phrases that can help you handle very specific, often tricky situations.
These special tools in the communication toolbox. Let's start with a delicate one for when you need to ask a potentially sensitive question. I don't mean to pry, but
Ooh, yes. To pry means to inquire too closely into someone's personal affairs. So by saying, I don't mean to pry up front, you are acknowledging that your question might be crossing a line. It shows you're being cautious and respectful.
exactly. For example, I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay? You seem a little down today. It frames the question from a place of concern, not just nosiness.
A great phrase for showing empathy. Now, what about when you want to offer a different opinion or a correction without sounding like you're attacking the other person?
For that, the perfect phrase is, correct me if I'm wrong, but
A classic. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the report is due on Friday, not Thursday. It's brilliant because you're presenting your idea as a humble suggestion, not an undeniable fact. You're inviting collaboration.
it's much less confrontational than saying you're wrong. It opens a dialogue instead of shutting it down. Next up, a simple but essential apology. Sorry to keep you waiting.
A must-have. If you're late for a meeting, a call, or just meeting a friend for coffee, this should be the very first thing that comes out of your mouth. It acknowledges their time is valuable and that you've inconvenienced them.
So important. It can smooth over so much potential frustration. And related to understanding complex ideas, another way to express confusion is, I'm not quite sure I follow.
This is a slightly more formal or professional alternative to I don't understand. The word follow here means to understand a sequence of ideas or a line of reasoning.
Right, it suggests that you were on board, you were following along, but you've just missed a connection in the logic. It's a very polite way to ask for more clarification. I'm not quite sure I follow. Could you explain that last part again?
Perfect. And finally, the ultimate tool for ending a debate that is going nowhere is let's agree to disagree.
The peace treaty phrase.
Exactly. When you and another person have a fundamental difference of opinion and you realize that continuing the argument will only lead to frustration, this phrase is a lifesaver.
It really is. It allows you to end the conflict while still respecting the other person's right to their own opinion. It says, I value your relationship more than I value winning this argument.
And in the long run, that is almost always the most important thing.
And that's our list of 30 essential buffer phrases. It seems like a lot, but as we've discussed, they all serve a similar purpose, to make communication smoother and more considerate.
They really do. The main takeaway from me is that mastering a language is about so much more than just vocabulary and grammar. It's about understanding the culture of communication, the art of showing respect, building rapport, and navigating social situations with kindness.
Well said. And the great thing is, you don't need to memorize all of these at once. A good approach might be to pick one or two phrases from a category that you find particularly challenging.
Right. If ending conversations are awkward for you, maybe try using, I should let you get back to it, this week. Just practice that one phrase, see how it feels, and notice how people react.
That's wonderful advice. It's all about taking small steps, building your confidence, and adding more tools to your communication toolbox. These phrases are like keys that can unlock smoother, more effective, and more natural-sounding conversations.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to English Every Day.
It was a pleasure having you with us. Goodbye for now.